Now, the Browns are known for having had a couple of bad drafts in the last few years. And I'm not piling on an already bad bandwagon of, hey, look how bad the Browns are with this video. This actually has a further purpose, which you'll see at the end of the video, but I'm doing it with the Browns now. But this can be done for any team in the NFL. No team is perfect at the draft. Forget hindsight is 2020. I want to look at what a Browns team would look like if their future sight was 2020 and they made the perfect choice for every single position that they drafted in the last few years. And by every position, I mean in the first and second rounds. So how this is going to work, I'm going to look at what position the Browns drafted, so quarterback, defensive end, like that, and then I'm going to look at the position they drafted that player in the draft and who was available after that point. Obviously, they could have never drafted anyone who was already drafted, but let's say they knew exactly how good everybody would be. Who would they have taken at those positions instead? And I'm going to build this Browns team with those new players in mind. So I've done this for every draft from 2015 to 2011. I'm not touching this 2016 draft. Let's pretend that is perfect. We haven't seen enough from any of those players yet, really just one season. And we start with the offensive line, where the Browns tend to have actually done okay. Now we're going back to 2011 anyway, but Joe Thomas would always be here, who of course was the absolute perfect choice. And at left guard, they could have Jack Mewhort. Now Joel Bitonio was a good selection with the 35th overall pick in the second round. I actually have nothing wrong with that selection. I just think maybe Mewhort is a little bit better. And now for the center, in 2015 with the 19th overall selection, the Browns took Cameron Irving, and they could have had Mitch Morse, who's turned out to be a very good player for the Chiefs. At right guard, they'd still have Greco because they didn't take anybody else. And at right tackle, Mitchell Schwartz. Now obviously he left them in free agency, but I'm basically just arguing they should have tried harder to retain him. At tight end, they'd still have Gary Barnidge, and just to get it out of the way, at fullback, they'd still have Danny Vitale, who's a tight end on Ultimate Team. Now on to quarterback, and we'll start in 2012 when the Browns selected Brandon Weeden, 22nd overall. Who could they have had? Russell Wilson. And then in 2014 when they took Johnny Manziel, they could have had Derek Carr. So rather than two quarterbacks not on the roster anymore, we would have seen the world's fiercest quarterback battle between Derek Carr and Russell Wilson. Now other players they could have had instead of Derek Carr could have been Teddy Bridgewater, Jimmy Garoppolo, or AJ McCarron. A couple of good choices there of players still in the NFL. So on to running back to 2012, the third overall selection, Trent Richardson. And here they could have had Lamar Miller. They also could have had Doug Martin or Alfred Morris. And now on to the wide receivers. Obviously wide receiver has been another position, just like the rest of the offense, where the Browns have struggled a little bit. Well, number one would still be Corey Coleman. I think that's a very good selection. And like I said, I'm not touching the 2016 draft anyway. But now in 2013, the Browns gave up their second round pick to take Gordon in the supplemental draft. Gordon, although technically still on the roster, I can't ever see playing in the NFL again. And if they would have saved that second round pick, here are some of the players they could have had. Kenny Stills, Terrence Williams, or Keenan Allen. And in 2011, they drafted probably one of the worst wide receivers to be drafted in the top 2 rounds of the draft, Greg Little, and who they could have taken instead, Randall Cobb, and he fits perfectly into that slot role for them. Now, technically, Doug Baldwin came into the league in 2011, but he was undrafted, so nobody even thought to take him, so you can't say, oh, the Browns should have taken him. I've kept undrafted players out of this for that reason, but that is the offense. If the Browns had drafted perfectly, had 2020 future vision, they would have had this team. A very good offensive line, still Gary Barnidge at tight end, that's not a negative thing, he's a good player. Corey Coleman, Keenan Allen, and Randall Cobb at wide receiver. Lamar Miller at running back, but most ridiculously, obviously, Derek Carr and Russell Wilson. So that's a nice offense there, a championship caliber offense, if I don't say so myself. On to the defense, and we start with the linebackers. Now the two middle linebackers would still be Christian Kirksey and Demario Davis, and they're not bad. And now their right outside linebacker would be Jamie Collins, but not because they traded for Jamie Collins, but because in 2013 with the 6th overall pick, they drafted Barkevious Mingo, who apparently technically was drafted as a defensive end, obviously switched to outside linebacker with their scheme, and there are no good other defensive ends. They actually pretty much took the best available player in that strict position. However, in terms of outside linebackers, there sat Jamie Collins, and now the Patriots and Browns have literally traded those two players. The Browns now do have Jamie Collins, and the Patriots have Barkevious Mingo. So a player they have actually ended up with now would have been the player who would have been best for them to draft. And now in 2011, with the 37th overall pick in the second round, the Browns drafted Jabal Sheard, who was actually a pretty good pick. He went to the Patriots in free agency, but he was quite well performing for them. Pernell McPhee would have been the guy they would have been able to take there instead. Here are the two safeties. The Browns haven't drafted a safety, which kind of figures when you look at who they've got on the team. Tramon Williams is only here as a cornerback on the game. Now, I don't know if he plays free safety, strong safety specifically. That's a position they've completely abandoned this entire time. At least, of course, in the first 2 rounds, I mean. And then we move on to the cornerbacks. Joe Hayden in this situation would only be the number 2 guy. Jamar Taylor would be a very nice number 3. And at number 1, instead of in 2014 taking Justin Gilbert with the 8th overall pick, who's now been traded to the Steelers and eventually cut, again, one of the undrafted guys they could have had, but obviously not counting, Malcolm Butler. They could have taken Bradley Roby, or they could have had Jason Verrett. And Jason Verrett, Joe Hayden, and Jamar Taylor's not a bad group whatsoever. And now the defensive line, and this one falls weirdly perfectly into place. Okay, so Danny Shelton along with Mitchell Schwartz, which I don't think I said at the time, they drafted Schwartz in the second round in 2012. That was the correct pick. No better tackle or right tackle in that draft available. They hit the nail on the head, and I argue they should have just kept him. Danny Shelton again was the correct pick. No better defensive tackle or nose tackle in the 2015 draft available to them. And now the rest of the line, and of course the Browns play a 3-4. In 2011 with the 21st overall pick, the Browns selected Phil Taylor at defensive tackle, who's now out of the league. Who they could have had instead, Jarrell Casey. Now for the final play with the 51st pick, so again in the second round, they took Nate Orchard in 2015. And the 2 players they could have had instead, and it's really, if you want to count Nate Orchard as an outside linebacker, it's the first one I'm going to say. If you count him as just an edge guy, it's the second one. You could have had Marcus Golden or Danielle Hunter. And now I've gone for Danielle Hunter in this situation because now they've got the perfect defensive line. They've got their nose tackle, Danny Shelton, their defensive tackle, Jarrell Casey, and their defensive end, Danielle Hunter. If they would have drafted perfectly, they'd have the perfect 3-4 defensive line, the perfect linebackers for that system pretty much, great cornerbacks, safeties they didn't draft in the first or second rounds, and we've already seen the offense. This is what the Browns would look like if they had drafted perfectly every single time. And now before I move on to the second part of this thing, if this is something actually you thought was interesting and would like to see for some other teams in the NFL, like I said, this isn't to bash on the Browns. I thought it would be interesting to look at. The Browns are just the team I happen to choose. So if you want me to go through more teams in the NFL, let me know. And now here's pretty much the reason why I actually made this video. Now there's nothing we can do about past drafts. That's gone, that's been done, it's over. However, what if the Browns were to perfectly draft for the next 2 years? Now, disclaimer here, I'm not saying these are the perfect players. I'm saying was if who they happen to draft happened to be the perfect player, and also I've chosen these because I wanted to use these players. Imagine that if with their first overall pick, the Browns select Myles Garrett.
Jackson looking for Bonifant, doesn't have a chance to get it to him. Myles Garrett with a second sack for A&M.
Wow, is he coming in a hurry, and I'm talking about Myles Garrett.
See, pressure coming. They got him. First opportunity for Myles Garrett. He was nearly untouched.
Now imagine if they traded down with their 12th pick, maybe 10 picks later, to pick up Jabril Peppers at strong safety.
And they'll swing it out to the freshman again, Colby, but this time they find him and knock him down. Jabril Peppers.
Side of an offensive lineman. This low-line drive fielded by Jabril Peppers. Here he goes. Jabril Peppers turning on the speed. Breaks a tackle. The cutback. Peppers headed for a touchdown.
Then with the 33rd overall selection, imagine if they took Christian McCaffrey.
32. And he drives this one. McCaffrey fields it inside the 5. McCaffrey stays on his feet. McCaffrey flag on the play. At the 20, brings it inside. He's got breakaway speed. Christian McCaffrey down the sideline. We've got our first Mac attack. 96 yards if it stands.
Play action. Burns looking for McCaffrey, and look out. What a way to start the night. Christian McCaffrey, 56-yard touchdown reception.
And then with their second pick in the second round, imagine if they went for outside linebacker Ryan Anderson from Alabama to finish off that first draft class.
On 2nd and 7, they feed Scott, who tries to bounce it, but is going to be dropped for a loss. Ryan Anderson pressure, and they do bring 5 rushers. Cook, flushed, hit, dropped.
There we go, pretty nice team. We've got ourselves 3 new defenders, a safety, which was a much needed position, an outside linebacker, and a star at defensive end. But that's not it yet. We said 2 years, and imagine if in 2018, with the 5th overall pick, the Cleveland Browns select Lamar Jackson, quarterback, Louisville.
Keeper, Jackson cuts back. Jackson keeps it. Gets blocks on the edge. Jackson navigates in for his second touchdown.
Here's Jackson. Gives to Smith. Nope, he doesn't. He runs out to the left side. He's going to outrace from the corner. Hurdles the defender at the 5 and squeezes inside the pylon for a touchdown. He jumped right over him.
Basically, this is the long way of me announcing a player career mode with Lamar Jackson, with those players added in. I've obviously had to create those guys myself. I will make an actual episode detailing exactly what these players are like and stuff. But I wanted to do another series. I wanted to do a player career mode, and I didn't want to do it like anybody else. And I thought, why not go 2 years into the future, use Lamar Jackson, have a bunch of other user-made players on that team that could come in this draft that the Browns could select, and this is how I would like to see the Browns do it. I don't think they should be going for a quarterback until the right one comes to them. I'm not arguing Lamar Jackson is the right one for them, but I think this year they should just be going for the best possible players at every position, and I think it could turn the Browns into a pretty interesting team if they ended up looking like this. So that new series will be out on Thursdays, every Thursday from now on. Lamar Jackson, player career. So look out for episode 1 coming out next week.